Scientists talk on the Game Master's Grimwatch on how to run the true RPG.
Welcome to my room of whites, grays, and yellows. Welcome to this episode of The Zealots of Burbio. Today we're going to be talking about traps. No matter what RPG you're playing, it's always fun to have a dungeon setting, and in such a dungeon setting, it can be really fun to have environmental hindrances. So that's what you can use traps for. Traps and puzzles, there's a fine line between them, but we'll count puzzles as being more player-based, where they have to solve something or think outside the box or use knowledge that they've had from previously in the campaign. Those are puzzles. For traps, we're saying things that are more character-based, so more hit point-based or certain effects that are put on them, like almost like a video game. So in that way, we're going to say that's the difference, and we're just going to be talking about traps. We might address puzzles in the future, but puzzles are way broader, and there's a lot more you can do with them, and it's more creative than traps. Traps are kind of a little harder to be creative with, and you have to make them either like really complex if you want to be creative, or keep them way too simple and then it's too easy for the players to understand, or they just die. So it's difficult to make a good trap, but this episode we will be discussing that. These are 11 things to ask yourself. Number 1, is it realistic? Is it understandable? Does it make sense in the world? Is there verisimilitude? These are all ways of saying, does it work? Does it make sense? If you were to describe it to your players, would they just say that doesn't make sense? There's like faulty logic in that, or just what? Would they be just confused by the fact that like some parts of it don't make sense? An example of this could be you walk into a classic dungeon with like stone brick walls, and you walk across the room, and then suddenly darts start to fly out at you, and then you check the ground and there are no pressure plates, and then you're like, okay, it must be some sort of magical trigger, but then the darts shoot out again, and then you're like, wait, how does the loading system work? And then darts keep shooting out infinitely, and you're like, this doesn't make any sense logically. Why would there be an infinite amount of darts? Is it like a magical? And I guess you could always just say, ooh, magic, but don't do that. It's a lot better when you actually have a good reason, and that kind of adds to the realism and makes it so that the players can be more immersed and feel like the trap is actually like interesting and worth it. And if they do get hurt by it, they don't feel like, oh, that was stupid. They feel like, okay, yeah, this is a difficult dungeon. So that key difference is very important for dungeon making. Number 2, does it fit in the place? So whatever your dungeon setting is, if it's like a classic dungeon, maybe use like spike traps and saw traps and that sort of thing. If it's like an ice dungeon, maybe use ice-themed traps or water-themed traps or something along those lines, maybe crystals. And if you're in like a lava or like a volcano, use fire lava-based traps, and maybe spike traps too, but like try to make it so that it's like you don't mix those too much, because it's really good to set almost like a tone or a certain aesthetic to the setting, and you can really do that very strongly with the traps, because the traps are going to be somewhat memorable, like more memorable than just your descriptions, right? Because they actually risk their lives going through that trap, or they do remember it because they nearly died, or they remember thinking, oh, that was a cool trap, I like that creative idea. So making sure that your ice dungeon doesn't have lava traps, unless that is your aesthetic, like fire and water, but it just might not make sense for that to happen, and it's like, why would that be there? That is just kind of silly. So the next is, does it have a purpose? What is it guarding and why is it there? So trying to understand, like, for example, if you have like a swinging blade trap in front of a door, maybe that door, behind the door, the person that made the trap doesn't want you to get through there, so it's trying to stop you. But maybe if it's like a dead end, then there is no trap there. Like, just thinking about that kind of thing and thinking about what its purpose is there. If you're just going through a jungle and then randomly there are traps and there's no need for them, there's no real purpose for them to be there, and it's just traps for the sake of having traps, and that's not a good thing to do. So every trap should have a purpose. Now, number 4 ties into this one, and it's who put it there. Maybe we'll go back to that jungle or forest idea. Maybe some tribal huntsmen tried to put it in there, and just to catch animals, and then they had like a net trap, and they picked you guys up. It's just like Star Wars. There's a purpose there. They want to get food, right? And so that makes it so the trap isn't just there because you as a DM decided to put it in there, right? There should be a good reason, and you should make that reason tied to whoever made it. And in that, you can also add lore about the place. It's always good to like flesh out your world any way you can, and doing it just by telling them the lore is always a bad idea. So it can be really good to tie in little bits of lore, like fragments of lore, into everything you do, and tying it into traps is a very, very important thing to do. For example, you could have like a dart trap, and then when they actually look at the arrow, they can see it's like drow or dark elf arrows, and then they're like, oh, okay, the drow are here. Or maybe they made these traps. Like that's a really cool thing you can do to just tie in lore and then make it so that it's like the players can kind of learn about your world throughout the traps if they really want to or pay attention to that. So the next thing is more mechanical, and this is, are the players able to avoid the trap if they are witty? If they think about it and if they're clever and they don't go in super like recklessly, are they able to just completely avoid any damage from the trap or any effect from the trap? Obviously, this doesn't mean that the trap is like easy to get through or anything like that. But if they are clever, is there a way that they can find a loophole or get through the trap and it's still interesting and rewards them for being clever? This can make it so that when they're going through a dungeon, they don't just keep taking damage and then being like, oh, there's nothing I can do. I've been clever, I've been role-playing, and it doesn't matter, I just still take damage. So it can be really good to reward them for actually trying. Now the next is are there multiple ways to get through this trap, or these traps? Because if you allow for a certain range of creative freedom for the players, and so that they can get through it in multiple ways based on what their characters can do, maybe spells they have, all that sort of thing, that can really make it so that role-playing comes in and their abilities come in, rather than it just being doing exactly what you had planned to get through the trap. Once again, that really encourages the players to roleplay and act in character and really try to be clever and care about the world and the trap and all that. Now, number 7, is it complex enough that they actually have to think about it and test things and try things out and maybe risk taking some damage or getting hurt or having some effect put on them? But once they fail, then maybe they can learn and get through it. That's the complexity of a trap is very important, because if your trap is just something like they walk on a pressure plate, spikes shoot up and kill them, that's just, there's no complexity there, and they can't really think around it besides just maybe putting a rope across or flying or something like that. But like, that's not very complex. The more complex it is, the more the players will appreciate your world and be like, oh, okay, he actually put some thought into this. This is very cool. Now, the next one is very similar, and that's, is it creative? You got to make it so that it's an original trap. It's something that they haven't seen before, because if they've seen it before, then they're going to know, oh yeah, I've seen this in a movie or another D&D campaign, so I just know exactly how to do this. And it makes it really hard for them not to metagame. Like, it would be kind of stupid for them to not metagame in that kind of situation, because if they know how to get through the trap, then they're just going to do it correctly. They don't want to die. So you want to eliminate any metagaming and make it so that it's actually an interesting new experience for them. Make it creative. Make it your own thing. That's hard, obviously. It takes a lot of time, effort, work, and just playing around with a lot of different trap ideas, and also brainstorm with others like that aren't in the campaign. But nonetheless, if you make your own creative idea, then you can turn a trap from being just a paragraph of stats and damage to being a cool description of something that they have to work through and understand. And then, sure, there's a little bit of damage and effects and whatever, but like, it's way more than that. And that can really flesh out the world and make it so that it's just that little bit of effort put in goes a long way. Now, number 9. This one's a hard one. Is it punishing enough? If the players are reckless or stupid and just run right through it, will it maybe not kill them, but will it actually do something like cut off their leg or poison them for a month or something like that will actually really affect their character in the future? Because while it is nice to be a nice DM and pull punches sometimes, if they're being stupid, they should get the natural consequences of hurting themselves. So of course, this does depend on the tone of the campaign, but for most campaigns, like D&D especially, having death or some sort of real consequence and punishment for stupidity is a good thing to do, because it really teaches the player's characters, like, don't just do whatever. This might be a game, but take it at least some bit seriously. The next and the second to last one, number 10, is the effect interesting, so that having multiple traps isn't just kind of boring and it doesn't get monotonous. If you have 3 of these traps right after each other, would it just be like, oh, this sucks, this is boring? Or would it be like, oh cool, there are so many cool effects that can happen at this trap that it's like, it's very interesting. You might not want to do this with every trap. Some traps can be simpler or less interesting. But if you can make your traps so that maybe you roll a d10 for a random damage type or effect or something like that every time, that can make such an interesting, almost random playing style. That can move forth a narrative and keep things interesting while pretty much just reusing the same trap over and over again. Makes it so you, as a dungeon master, have to do less work, and it makes it so the player characters are actually interested in seeing what these traps can do. So it's a double win. And the number 11 question, which is pretty much a question in any area, like even combat encounters and exploration. This question is definitely the most important. And this is, if this trap were to kill someone, would it be lame? Would it be like a lame death? Would they be like, oh, that's stupid, that's not fun? Or would they be like, okay, that was an epic way to die, that was perfect, that was dramatic for the story, that was hilarious? Like, would it be fun, or would it just be lame? Some traps are just like, you're walking along, you step on a button, and then spikes shoot up and you're dead. It's like, well, okay, that's lame. There's no drama there, there's nothing interesting. But if it's like, okay, you have to solve a puzzle in 4 seconds, and your character's really stupid, and you're trapped in a room alone where you have to solve this puzzle, and you don't know how to do this, and then you fail, and then like toxic gas starts spraying in the room, and then you start like shouting and coughing and burping, and then you're like falling on the ground trying to do the puzzle, and then you start rolling around, and then you end up dying because you're really stupid. That's a story to tell. That's funny. I just made that up right now, but like that's hilarious. That would be a funny situation. And having something like, see that trap that I just described, it's a little more complex. There are a few more parts to it, but just having those few more parts can make it so that the trap is not lame if they die to it. It's like, maybe sad, sure, because character deaths are usually always sad, but still it is interesting, and they'll be like, okay, I'm happy with that, how that ended. Well, that's the end of this video. We hope you enjoyed and maybe learned something. Traps are a difficult part of DMing, because if you use traps that are pre-made, they'll probably already know how to deal with them. But if you make your own traps, that takes a lot of time and effort and creativity. But hopefully this video helped you with that and gave you some guidelines and understanding maybe how to do that a little easier. Thanks for watching, and the Zealot Suburbio say...